for those people that are watching and that have been struggling for a long time, and a lot of people use terms like trying to fix myself or fix the problem, or um, I think they view themselves in a negative light that they shouldn't be viewing themselves in. But the idea is that they're trying to fix something.
Mm.
What would you suggest as some of the first steps to getting unstuck, or to just the first steps on your journey? Obviously, therapy is going to be a real key part of that, and I think that your book is a really nice place to start as well.
Uh-huh.
But what would be some other simple things that people could do to get themselves unstuck?
Well, what you just described just a moment ago, um, this constant fixing, uh, uh, psychotherapy and psychology can actually backfire on us, because this idea of always getting better can be hijacked and
Hmm.
used against us. We need to start at a place of radical self-acceptance. This is who I am now. Doesn't mean I can't get better. My previous book, called I'm Working on It in Therapy, there's a whole chapter that says that one of the key skills in therapy is being able to accept appropriate responsibility, but not take too much responsibility. And that means accepting myself as I am now. We've got to break into that cycle of I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough. I am who I am now. That's just the way it is. Now, that can be hard to do because, again, it feels
Hmm.
scary, because if I'm not pushing myself, who knows what's going to happen? Or am I going to be humiliated? Or are people going to laugh at me? Will I lose my job? Um, we tend to do better with crises than we think we'll do. We imagine that our
Hmm.
whole life is going to fall apart if we don't continue to be so controlling, for instance. There's a fair amount of research out there that says that it's not as bad as we think it's going to be.
Yeah.
One of the books I quote a lot in my blog and in my book is Stumbling on Happiness by Daniel Gilbert. And there's tons of research that says these crises that we think they're not as bad as we think they're going to be. It's like
Yeah.
Mark Twain said, the worst things in my life never happened to me.
Yeah.
We're always imagining.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Now,
Yeah. That's a really good quote, and very accurate a lot of the
I
time.
mean, I can't guarantee nothing bad's going to happen, but I think generally we're more resilient than we think we are. And facing into our fears and not trying to prop ourselves up with those strategies is often what we need to do to break free from it.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, for me in therapy, there's, to speak to what you just said, there's a lot of, okay, so you're afraid of this, or fearful, or you're procrastinating on this certain thing. What happens in the worst case scenario?
Yeah.
And then I'll say, okay, this is what would happen.
Hmm.
Okay, so if that happens, then what are what's the worst thing that would come out of that thing? And we just go and go and go, as far as we can, and nothing is ever nearly as bad as I built it up in my head.
Yeah.
The realities of what could actually happen versus what I'm imagining happening, they very rarely line up. And I think that that's an effective tool. It doesn't eliminate all of the fear,
Yeah.
but it does ground you, I think, a bit more in the realities of what you need to do, and it's very rarely as bad as you think it will be, and very often it's something like this discussion. It's very enjoyable,
Yeah. Yeah.
but we just have to kind of get out of our own way.
Yeah. I would take it a step further. I call this my first book, Going into the Fire. Let's say the worst thing does happen.
Mm,
What's more likely to happen is that we'll realize that, oh, that bad thing happened and I'm still here.
yeah,
And it's burnishing us, burning off the impurities, the fears, by exposing ourselves to things we fear. I mean, there are forms of therapy that are based in a very concrete way on this, like exposure and relapse prevention therapy. In psychodynamic therapy, the therapy I do, it's on a much more general, broad scale about facing into the things that we fear so that we're going into the fire. And that's
yeah,
what helps to burn off some of the stuff.
yeah. So on, so in the past, when I've been, working on myself, especially, on my own, out of therapy, um, trying to kind of make my compulsiveness work for me. Because I think I've always believed a little bit in the idea that I could use my my powers for good.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I'm wondering if some of the reason that I was unable to do it in the past is because I have some other comorbidities
Uh-huh.
as well.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, and I don't know if that's accurate, but if it is,
Uh-huh.
do you think that this book, the book that you've written, The Healthy Compulsive, would be beneficial for people with comorbidities? I guess.
I believe it would be. I mean, I'm partial here, I admit. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it gets exponentially more complicated with these
Yeah.
other conditions. Sometimes we have to tackle one at a time, like someone who had OCD might need to deal with some of the
Mhm.
specific obsessions and compulsions before. Um, Depression is a big comorbidity with OCPD. I mean, it's a depressing way to live, you know? Uh,
Yeah.
People who have OCPD score lower on something called the Reasons for Living inventory, you know? Um, but I think that dealing with OCPD can actually help those depressive tendencies. It's kind of a chicken and egg thing. Does the
Yeah. Yeah.
depression come out of
Definitely.
the OCPD, or does the OCPD come out of depression? I think the depression often is a result of living in an OCPD way. Now, having said that, I think with major depressive disorder, which has a larger neurochemical component to it,
Mhm.
um, it's a little different, and it might take medication. Doesn't have to, but sometimes it does. But in that case, I think that is a different aspect that makes the OCPD more complicated. In these cases, I think it is more important to have a therapist to try to work out how those two
Sure.
come together and make it harder.
Yeah. And reading through the book, I think that it uh, at the very least, it's an excellent starting place because I experience anxiety and depression. Those would be the two primary, I guess, comorbidities that I would attach. But I read things in the book that I felt that I hadn't read before or wasn't aware of, that I thought, even with the depression and anxiety, I think that these would be, very, very helpful.
Uh-huh.
And so that was the idea I had when I was reading the book. And going on, reading through the book, I found myself, kind of wholeheartedly agreeing with all of the ideas and everything that you write about. And I also agree that a lot of the good that's been accomplished throughout history, and we've kind of touched on a few people,
Uh-huh.
but I think a lot of it has been accomplished as the direct result of compulsive people channeling that compulsiveness.
Yeah.
I think those of us that are aware of the traits associated with the driven personality, we're able to identify those traits in some of the most successful people in the public eye.
Mhm.
You also made another interesting point when you brought up the fact that part of the reason OCPD can be so difficult to treat is that it must be the most culturally sanctioned psychological disorder in history.
Yeah.
Did I get that right?
Yes, you did. Yeah.
Okay. Do you think that's something that could ever be adjusted for in modern society?
Um, a society is kind of like a huge ocean liner that's very difficult to turn
Yeah.
around. But we have been doing it. I think of things like gender fluidity, think of
Hmm.
autism, even introversion was pathologized just like 40 years ago. So we have slowly turned around the opinion on some of these things. So
Hmm.
my hope is that rather than our culture encouraging pathological compulsive behavior, we can become more aware of it so that it can be used in a healthy way. I mean, look, a lot of big corporations are setting up Zen rooms and putting in games and making
Hmm.
it healthy for people to be at a workplace where they have more leisure. So I think there's some ways that we're starting to understand, for instance, workaholic problems.
Yeah.
But I think it's also kind of like racism. We institutionalized some laws 60 years ago about racism, but it's still kind of the fabric of our society. And so
Yeah.
we need, it's going to take time to change public opinion and to inform people about it. I mean, I am stunned by how few people actually know about OCPD, much less know
Mhm.
the difference between OCD and OCPD. Uh,
Yeah. I think that's what, we're out here trying to do is to, well, it's interesting because, raising awareness about OCPD, and speaking of pathologizing, I know that you're not specifically crazy about using the term
right.
OCPD itself.
Yeah.
So, uh, and I think I, understand, but how would you, or what would you describe as your reasons behind not, not preferring to use the term OCPD itself?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's so similar to OCD, which is the more popularized term
Oh,
that it leads to a
yeah,
lot of confusion. The other is
absolutely.
that the term goes back, it's an early psychoanalytic term referring to people who compulse in order to get away from their obsessions. So the two are linked. I think there's some truth to that original insight, but some people just compulse, some people just obsess. But it also, the term itself doesn't really reflect on the fact that it's really about underlying feelings. It's not just
Mhm.
about thinking. Obsessing is about thinking. So
Yeah,
I think that the term's a little problematic in itself. I mean, I guess I'm more inclined to something like perfectionistic personality disorder, and
yeah.
maybe we'll find a way to take the disorder part out. Um,
Mhm.
but I think it's much broader than obsessive compulsive, though those are probably two of the closest terms that we have so far.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because in probably over the last year or so, I've been using the word perfection, perfectionistic, perfectionism, a lot more in my video titles and the descriptions, and actually in the content itself, because the people that are experiencing the symptoms of OCPD, I think that's what they most frequently associate themselves with.
Yeah,
And so because of that, I think, that the term OCPD is a little bit of a disservice, because it's really not what people are searching when they're looking for help with what they're experiencing.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been using
Um,
perfectionistic more too because I know that the people who need it are more likely to find it through that term. And my hope is that you and I and other people who are working on this can introduce them, and then they go, "Oh, that, yeah, that's me," and it can actually bring relief when people see that and they recognize
mhm.
it, if it's done in a context of acceptance.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, in your book, when you talk about the temptation of, maybe you can explain this a little bit more, but you talk about the temptation of glossing over the inner work
Mhm.
and jumping straight into the outer work.
Right.
So, what do you mean by that more specifically? Because I think it's a really important, point that you make. So, what do you mean by that
Okay.
more specifically, and why is that so tempting to do?
Sure. By outer work, I'm referring to changing our behavior. Behavior is easier to change than the deeper layers of personality and easier to change than feelings. So, for instance, if let's say that my partner is unhappy with me for certain things that I do. Actually, let's say my partner is unhappy with me for a lot of reasons. Okay. And I start
Yeah.
fixing the things that I do, like
Hmm.
I try to spend more time at home, or I try to be less critical, try to do this and try to do that. That will make some difference. But my guess
Hmm.
is that will not entirely satisfy the partner because they can feel the layers beneath that have to do with feeling, both feeling about the partner and feeling about themselves. And, when you're with somebody, whatever they're doing, you can still sense things about them. Um, and so I think that just working on the externals, changing the behavior, is a good step. But
Hmm.
I think, first of all, some of the bad behavior will come back inevitably. It's going to slip through the cracks again if the deeper level isn't dealt with. I mean, I can remember gardening for my grandfather when I was a kid, and he said, "You always have to pull things up by the roots." That's my approach in therapy.
Mm,
We want to get it by the root as much as we can. Um,
yeah.
and this is not to get people stuck in the past by any means. My goal as a therapist is to help people live in the present because they are already living in the past. I'm trying to get them out of the past. Sometimes we have to go
Yeah.
back to the past to get them stuck out of the past and be in the present.
I'm definitely guilty of in the past doing the outer work
Yeah.
before doing the inner work, or not even being aware of the inner work that needs to be done and just focusing on the outer work. And I'm wondering if you've seen a lot of this in your practice, which is when I focus solely on the outer work, if I'm able to control or manage whatever symptom or trait I'm trying to control or manage, it's almost like whack-a-mole, and it just gets worse in another area of my life.
Yeah, I've actually heard that term used before. Um, yeah, I think if we aren't dealing with the different levels of it, it's going to come up in some different form. But I also want to say that I do agree with the behaviorist to some degree that you change your behavior, your feelings will follow. This is particularly important for the
Mm,
people who are on the thinker planner end of the continuum, that they need to get out and do stuff. They need to change their
yeah.
behavior, and some of their feelings will actually follow. So it's not like feelings don't change at all from behavior, but I think in many cases it's not enough.
Yeah, I think I have experienced that as well. I think some of that for me has been making the changes and then seeing how others react to the changes, having a lot more positive feedback, people enjoying my company
Hmm?
or being around me more.
Yeah.
And so I think that that has led to deeper realizations
Uh-huh.
that has, or maybe it hasn't necessarily, I've not been able to accomplish what I want to accomplish, but it's at least made me realize the importance of doing that inner work because I can see the benefits of it when I do the outer work.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So the book, The Healthy Compulsive, is undoubtedly, unquestionably a must read. It's really, really excellent, and it comes up very frequently in a lot of the online groups. I see people discussing your book quite frequently.
Uh-huh.
So I don't want to give too much away for the people that haven't read that yet,
Uh-huh.
haven't read the book yet, because I want them to go out and get it.
Hmm.
But there's a few, I guess, highlights that resonated with me, and I was just gonna see if I could bounce some of my favorite parts of the book off of you and
Okay.
and get your reaction or answers.
Uh-huh.
So the first one was when you mentioned questioning the expectations you have set up for yourself.
Hmm.
Why is this such an important step?
Because if we don't, we continue to operate on a strategy of trying to feel better about ourselves through achievement, through expectations. And we've got to be able to break into that cycle. Um, as I think I've said earlier today, um, we become unhealthy compulsives because, in some level, we feel either unlovable or inadequate, that basic insecurity. And if we're trying to solve the insecurity by achievement, by expectations, it continues to feed the problem. And let's say that we win the prize. We feel good for
Hmm.
a little while, but it never really gets to the bottom of the problem. And once again, we have to win another prize in order to feel like we've met expectations and we're lovable.
Yeah, yeah. You write that that working harder and harder will not resolve underlying anger. I think that this is precisely why a lot of us experience high level uh, of frustrations and then just throw our hands up.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that a lot of us are missing while pushing ourselves to work harder and harder?
Okay. Um, the color of your lover's eyes. If you're so focused on achieving or getting things done, you might not see the beautiful small things right in front of you. My observation with many people with compulsive tendencies is they get so caught up in work or in pleasing other people or in obsessing that they don't leave time for music, poetry, nature, I think is a really big one.
Mm.
um, because those things don't seem to bear any fruit. I think they're more like, in a way, I hate to say this, but they're kind of like long-term investments in our psychology, because you might not see the effects right away. You might not even feel it, but all these other things, relationships, the arts, nature,
Yeah.
are the things that we typically leave out if if we become workaholic or we become obsessive. Um, and it's sad because those are some of the things that give us the most joy. I mean, I don't want to
Yeah.
downplay the good feeling about getting stuff done,
Right.
especially if it's done for the pleasure of the achievement rather than making up for inadequacy.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people from the outside would assume that, let's say you have an unhealthy compulsive, and what they're doing is they're, spending 80 hours a week at work. I think that maybe there's some assumption that that at the very least, they really are enjoying their work
Mhm.
or the fruits of their labor. And I know for myself and other people that I've talked to, um, sometimes you don't even get to enjoy that.
Yeah.
You work on this big project and you think, when this project's done, I'm going to sit back and I'm going to be really happy and I'm going to look at it and I'm going to be proud. But as soon as I'm finished, the next project's sitting there waiting for me to do,
Mhm.
and I don't take the time to even enjoy the work that I've just done.
Yeah.
So, even the work itself can be hard to appreciate if you're coming from the perspective of being an unhealthy compulsive.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good example of what we were talking about before about um, dealing with the underlying issue, not just the externals. Like you might even be able to get yourself to stop working, but if you don't
Hmm.
deal with the insecurity that's led you to overwork, you're going to feel very anxious.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. Um, So there were admittedly passages in the book that actually made me feel a bit better because I thought, oh, okay, I've already cracked that thing, so that's one less thing for me to work on. And one of those I felt was righteous indignation.
Mhm.
I think learning to really put yourself into someone else's shoes. Well, over time, that breeds empathy. So, why, in your opinion, is righteous indignation such a damaging personality trait?
Mhm. There's some speculation, Robert Wright, for instance, who says that there are evolutionary needs for righteous indignation. Someone in your tribe doesn't follow the rules. So there's some of it that's deeply embedded. But if we get into that too much, and I can get into it too when I feel like people don't follow the rules, there are a
Hmm.
couple of things that could happen. One is it cuts us off from other people because it puts us into us and them. I'm the good guy, they're the bad guy, rather than having any thoughts about, well, I wonder why they're like that. I'll give you an example. Um, I know a woman who's paralyzed on half side of her body.
Hmm.
So she was walking up the steps of the subway and she had to walk on the left side because the other side is paralyzed. So she has to hold on the left side. So someone's running up the subway and starts to curse her out for walking up the wrong side of the subway. He had
Hmm.
righteous indignation at her. He didn't stop to see that she's partially paralyzed.
Yeah,
And so it put up a terrible barrier between the two of them.
yeah.
Another one is that's part of a strategy to feel better about ourselves. They're bad, I'm good. The more we can prove that the other person's bad, they don't follow the rules, I follow the rules. That's that strategy of comparing to try to deal with my insecurity rather than just looking at myself directly. Jung talked a lot about the importance of owning our own shadow, our own dark sides,
Hmm.
our own
Yeah,
imperfections. And I think righteous indignation keeps us from doing that. And the great thing about looking at our shadow is that there's actually good stuff inherent in our shadow. If we can look at it squarely, there's a lot of stuff to be redeemed there.
yeah, yeah. I think I think unfortunately we're seeing an uptick in righteous indignation at the moment.
Yeah,
So this isn't just something that compulsives are living with or are putting out there into the world.
yeah.
I think there's a lot of examples. I think almost daily in the media. And it certainly is causing a lot of division, I think. And so I almost think that this was something I recognized in myself as something important to work on.
Mhm.
And as I started to really come to terms with it and to start to make improvements in that area, I felt like I saw everybody else going in the other direction. So it's something that I would like to do more videos on in the future, because I think that we need to swing a little bit more into the
Yeah.
center, and not be so, I guess, judgmental
Yeah.
with everybody
Yeah.
all the time.
If I can, I'd like to do a very brief public service announcement. There's a national group called Braver Angels, which is committed to bringing people from the left and the right together to talk to each other and to listen to each other to try to lower polarization. And so they're working in a way on that sort of righteous indignation. But I'll leave it at that. Braver Angels.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to look that up right after we get done speaking. I wasn't familiar with them, but that's definitely, to the point of what I was talking about. I don't think it's just political division that we see, but
Mhm.
that's the one that's really easy to pick out,
Yeah.
because it's just every day, all day, we're being bombarded with that
Mhm.
that sort of uh, information and whatever disinformation, whatever you want to call it, the word of the day.
Mhm.
Um, Another point that really made me think when I was reading your book is when you talk about anger in relation to
Yeah.
depression. I think that our natural inclination is to believe that depression is mostly connected to sadness on some level. At least that's what I think entertainment would have you believe.
Yeah.
So, how can not working through anger consciously lead to issues with depression?
Okay. One of the dynamic theories about depression is that it results from anger turned against ourselves. So let's say that I'm very angry at somebody, but I feel like I'm not supposed to be angry at them for moral
Hmm.
reasons, or I can't get angry at them because who knows what's going to happen. I might turn that anger on myself and attack myself. And that sort of self attack can lead to depression. I mean, part of what depression is are these horrific um, attacks pulling us down, saying how terrible we are. And that can be a displacement from our anger at another person. I'm not necessarily saying that you should take a baseball bat and go hit the other person or even hit the couch, but to look at the anger squarely, to face it, to feel it, and decide consciously what to do with it rather than squelch it because it might get turned against you.
Later on in the book, another statement that you made that I would like to hear or have you expand upon a little bit is you mentioned that any math that leads to a healthier life needs to extend beyond the territory of the ego.
Mhm.
So I was wondering if you could expand upon that a little bit.
Sure. The ego is the executive function of the psyche. We're not talking here about being conceited, but it's the part of you
Hmm.
that gets stuff done. And it has to do with will. And people who are compulsive tend to identify with that will, with control, with producing, perfecting. And so that's their whole idea about who they are. And we are much more than that. Um, in the book, I talk about a very basic understanding of different parts of ourself, unconscious parts, being the parental part,
Hmm.
the child
Yes.
part, and the adult part, which is the rational part that can make good decisions. Now, that's the child is often locked up in the back of the car when we're driving.
Yeah.
It's not unusual to see in the dreams of compulsive, children that have been neglected. That's an
Hmm.
important part, especially for compulsives, to be able to say, okay, and I don't like this term. I'm sorry, but the inner child, it's so hackneyed, so overused. But there's a reason, we use it is because it does actually reflect what we experience to some extent. There's a part of me that just wants to eat ice cream and play. And I need to deal with that part of me consciously. Part of what I like about Jung is that he extends this map very broadly. In addition to the parent, the adult, and child, he says, well, there's the hero, there's the saint, um,
Hmm.
there's the rescuer, there's the shadow, there's persona. There are all these different parts of the personality that the more someone who's compulsive can acknowledge, the more it will help them to be healthy. like, let's just talk about the persona for a moment. The persona is the face we show to the world. It's what we want people to think about us. And
Yeah,
if there is, as I'm suggesting, some insecurity, we're going to use persona a lot to try to prove that we are competent, that we are moral, that we follow the rules, all of these things that compulsives identify with. Um, that's too thick a persona to have. There's a lot more to us than that persona. And the more we can identify and integrate them, the healthier and happier we're going to be.
excellent. I have a much better understanding now
Okay.
of what you meant by that.
Uh-huh.
Um, You mentioned ice cream a second ago, which loosely ties into the next question I had.
Uh-huh.
One very simple yet powerful exercise you advise in the book is trying to create a pie chart of the things most important to you, which made me think of ice cream.
Uh-huh.
And then next to that, draw a pie chart of how you actually spend your time and energy.
Right.
I'm curious as to why, when we are presented with such obvious truths,
Uh-huh.
we can still be resistant to that change.
Yeah. Um, I, I'm going to go back to my answer to another question you asked about what makes us get stuck. Here again, I
Mm,
think when we see that we're spending too much time at work, unless we have dealt with the underlying insecurity, fear of being loved, of not being loved, it's going to be hard for us to make changes in that pie chart.
yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Um, I In the book, I really love the suggestion of enlisting your capacity for hard work,
Uh-huh.
which tends to be a trait. So enlisting your capacity for hard work to honor your priorities and deepest goals.
Mhm.
And I'm curious why the choice of the word honor specifically.
Okay. Um, to me, honor has to do with actually changing our behavior. I might sound like I'm talking out two sides of my mouth right now, but um, if I think about I want to be a happier person, but I don't actually honor that goal by changing my behavior and lying in my hammock, then nothing's going to happen. Um, so it's not enough just to think about things. Um, there's a book that I love called Inner Work by Robert Johnson, and he gives an outline on how to deal with dreams, how to interpret your dreams. And the last step of four steps in that outline, he says, is do something about it. Do a ritual, to actually do something physical to honor what you just learned through that dream. And that's something I've tried to
Oh
take with
yeah,
me about honoring the change. Because one of the things I talk about in the book a lot is to be very clear with yourself about what your priorities are, what your values and your goals are. And it can be hard to change that pie chart, but I think the more you do it, the easier it gets. And also, as you're working
yeah,
underlying feelings that go along with that.
yeah. In the book, I'm not sure if everyone will be familiar with the concept of process addictions,
Right.
but you discuss them in the book, and I was wondering if you could explain to my audience what those are.
Okay. Um, process addictions are behaviors that we can't stop doing. It might be gambling. It might be obsessively going to the gym. It could be looking at
Mm,
pornography for hours and hours on end. So these are actual behaviors that are hard to stop. And the theory behind it is that you get a hit of endorphins when you engage in these behaviors. And that creates a negative feedback loop that you need more and more of that endorphin. Um, so if you want to get out of, say, workaholism, you're
mhm.
probably going to have to go through um, some withdrawal period, and it's going to feel uncomfortable.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. That 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 makes a lot of
yeah,
sense. I think that for any of us that have made any sort of progress, we have experienced the discomfort
yeah,
of making those
yeah.
changes. Um, the next question I had for you is something that I'm very interested in your opinion on. when you mention that we don't have research that measures the efficacy of a self-directed program of change, which is, I think, a lot of what your book is about is a self-directed program of change.
Mhm.
Not having that research, do you think that's something that will change soon, change at all, change in our lifetime?
No, I doubt we're going to get the research. We have so little research, even on OCPD itself, much less a self-guided program to get over it. So, until there's a well-funded foundation to pay for studies, uh, I don't think that that's going to happen.
Has there been research into self-directed programs of change for other mental health issues at all?
It's a good question. I don't know.
Okay,
Yeah.
I will have to look into that as
Okay.
well. I was
Yeah.
curious if you were familiar with any, but yeah, definitely none on the subject that we're talking about.
Yeah. But just
Um,
a couple of comments on that.
sure.
If you did decide that you wanted to do it on your own, and I should say, I'm a psychotherapist. I believe that psychotherapy can be helpful to anyone, but I make my living this way. But
Yeah.
trying to decide whether or not to do it on your own, a couple of things to look at. One is whether or not you need structure in your life. For some people, they need the weekly appointment. If you're good at setting your own structure, you've got a better chance. If you've got more people in your life giving you feedback, you've got a better chance of it working. And as a suggestion, if you were to try to do this on your own, I would recommend a book or a website by Eugene Genlin called Focusing. Uh, Genlin realized at some point that some people got a lot more out of therapy than others, and he tried to figure out why. And what he concluded is that some people are better able to go deeply and to focus on a particular emotion, listen to that emotion, and see what that emotion has to tell you. And he devised this process that has 6 steps in it, that can help you to sit with the emotion and to see what the emotion is telling you. His website is focusing.org, and just look for the 6 steps there. So if you can do it on your own, I'd say that's uh, a requisite to doing it on your own.
Yeah. I mean, I think the other thing that both of us are well aware of is around the world there are a lot of people that just they don't have access to therapy as much as we're proponents of it, as
Yeah,
much as we encourage people to enter into some form of therapy if they're able to. It just isn't available to everyone.
that's a really good
Um,
point.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's something that I'm sure both of us hope changes.
Mhm.
I think it'll be slow, but that's the goal.
Yeah.
But for those people that let's say that do have access to it or have access to some form of it, if somebody reads your book and feels motivated by it, and I know that anybody that reads the book is going to fall into that camp, what do you think are the sorts of questions they should ask themselves in order to determine if they should choose a self-directed program of change or whether they should right away kind of try to seek out the help of a professional?
Okay. I beat you to your question. I think if you're good at self structure, you can do it on your own,
Yeah.
or you're more likely to have success. If you have lots of people in your life to give you feedback, uh, those are some of the things, because without an actual human to interrupt the pattern, it can be hard
Mhm.
to be honest with yourself, because we're all really good at rationalization. And one thing a therapist can do is slow down and say, wait, do you hear what you're saying there? Does that really make sense to you? And just the emotional experience of being with another person can break some of those. Now, this is also coming from someone who, while I am a therapist, I know at times when I needed to go to the therapist, I didn't want to spend the money, didn't want to spend the time, but I ended up doing it because I knew it would pay off.
Mhm.
But I also know it's expensive and can be hard to spend the time too.
I think when I was asking that, I one of the things that I had in mind was if you are to go the self-directed route, do you think that there is what do you think the importance of accountability is? You mentioned having people around you. Do you think it's important or a good step to tell people around you that you're working on making changes?
Mhm.
either to either be held accountable or just so that people are aware of the work that you're doing on yourself or
Yeah,
with yourself.
I think that's a great idea. Like I know people in my Zen group do that. They talk to each other on a regular basis for accountability. It's kind of like what a sponsor for is in a 12-step program. So I think that's a great idea. Any sort of support groups to go along with
Mhm.
self-work are a great idea too.
Yeah. And there are support groups out there right now. If you're watching, there are support groups out there for people that have been diagnosed with obsessive compulsive personality disorder, or if you maybe identify with some of the traits, some of the things that we've talked about today. There's different types of groups. So I think that you would most likely be able to find something that you feel comfortable in. But there are options, and I think that's one of the nice things about the internet age.
Hmm.
To age myself, but is that prior to that it was a lot more difficult to find groups of people that have the shared experiences of struggling with some of these things. And especially if you're in a small community. So I think that it's really nice that we have access to these things now. I know part of the things. So I'm kind of spearheading a foundation for OCPD, and one of the things that I want to do is to create some more different types of spaces for people to be able to communicate with each other in, and to encourage each other. And I think again that's most important for those people that don't have access to any type of therapy, whether that's for financial reasons or cultural reasons or situational reasons.
Hmm.
So
That's great.
that's
I'm so glad you're
that's
doing that.
something I hope to see. Yeah. Yeah, it's something that people ask for a lot. I get a lot of people that reach out to me, and they're just like, where can I find help in such and such country or such and such city? I would probably venture to guess that that's the most common question that I get.
Yeah.
Sort of either where can I find a therapist in my hometown, or
Hmm.
where can I find people to kind of build me up and support me.
Yeah. And that's hard to find.
It is. It is. Even on the internet, it can be hard to
Yeah.
find, but there are some options out there. I usually link them in the descriptions of the videos, and I definitely will on this one. But when we talked about preparing for, both of us preparing for this interview, my initial list of questions was a mile long. I think I shortened it to about 3/4 of a mile.
Uh-huh.
But you have been super generous with your time today. I think that after those rapid fire questions, this is probably a good stopping point. Thank you so much for coming on the channel. This has been a long time in the making, and this discussion was every bit as insightful, enjoyable, and informational as I'd hoped it would be. So that said, I just want to give you the floor and ask: is there anything that I didn't get to that you'd like to share about your book specifically, or the work that you do more broadly, or anything that you're currently working on?
No, I think we've covered a lot. I hope people will try my blog, which is thehealthycompulsive.com. Um, if they like the book, to leave a review on Amazon. I mean, that's selfish in a way, but it's not entirely selfish, because my hope is that if people are getting help, then other people will take it seriously as a different perspective on it, you know?
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's fully justified. I do the same thing on the channel with liking the video, or subscribing or
Hmm.
commenting, and it's not because I need that to reaffirm myself. It's because I want more people to have access to the content, and that's just the way the algorithms work.
Hmm.
So I think it's really good. I think for those that have read your book, I strongly encourage you to check out the blog, and for those that are familiar with the blog, definitely go out and get the book. What formats is the book available in?
Right now, it's just hardcover and ebook. My agent just told me this week he's going to try to talk to the publisher about getting softcover. Don't know.
Okay,
That
and
would be a
all
while in the
all of
offing.
those are available through Amazon.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. I just want to make sure we send people to the right places.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you to the audience for joining us. Thank you again, Gary. It's been absolutely wonderful, and I hope to see you in another video sometime soon.
Yeah. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Bye, everyone.